I love FPS games, the good old first-person shooter, and I say old in the literal sense. This genre has been around for decades, with its most solid foundations stretching all the way back to the 90s. Everyone knows the story of Doom and how it almost single-handedly pioneered the FPS genre, and while Doom wasn't even close to being the first game in this style, it was certainly the most important at the time. Everything changed after Doom's meteoric success, and while I could talk about the impact and influence it had for hours, I'll spare you the history lesson and get to the point. Everyone wanted a piece of id Software's pie, and pretty shortly after Doom's release, the market began to flood with games of a remarkably similar style. Colloquially titled Doom clones at the time, some were definitely more successful at replicating the formula than others, but there's one game in particular from this era that did everything so well I'd argue that it could easily rival Doom itself, and absolutely holds up as one of the best of its time. I'm talking, of course, about the gothic action horror masterpiece that is Blood.
Victims, aren't we all?
Blood was released by Monolith, who also made a bunch of other games you've heard of, like Fear, Condemned Criminal Origins, and most famously, the Middle-earth games, which are all great, but the studio had anything but humble beginnings, as Blood was the first game they ever put out, back in 1997, which is actually more significant than you might think, because 97 was a full year after the release of Quake, and with everyone marveling over the technological advancements of that game, you would have had to do a lot to stand out if you were still using sprites at that point, and Blood did do a lot for sure, but I wonder if that may be one of the main reasons it didn't reach the popularity of its contemporaries at the time. Anyway, Blood being such an old game, the question arises pretty quickly of how best to play it on modern systems. You could always use DOSBox, sure, but the mouse look is horrendous and you don't get widescreen, so we have to turn to source ports instead. But naturally, it could never be that simple because Blood's source code was never officially released for some reason, so all the source ports are just reverse engineered using the original game's assets, and you know, this is all getting awfully complicated. Whatever, I use Blood GDX for this video because I'm the most used to it and it's pretty close to the original. It's not perfect, but I don't even care, man. Half the people watching this probably don't even know what the fuck I'm talking about. Hell, I barely know what I'm talking about. Let's just get to it. Spoiler warning for like the entire game, I guess, but Blood isn't really a game you can spoil all that much, so yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. In this game, you play as a badass gunslinger dude named Caleb. Now, Caleb was a high-ranking member of a cult worshipping the dark god Chernabog called the Cabal, along with his lover Ophelia and two friends, Gabriel and Ishmael. And then Chernabog just kinda kills all of them in one of the most hideous-looking cutscenes in the history of mankind, and a while later, Caleb comes back as an undead, I guess. And that's pretty much all the plot we're getting for now. Yeah, bear in mind, this was the pre-Half-Life era of shooters, and with a few exceptions here and there, developers generally didn't care too much about adding interesting narratives to their games. You know, that stuff was better left to RPGs and the like, right? I could read you that quote from John Carmack that everyone's already heard a million times, but frankly, that way of thinking has aged quite poorly, and most people these days are in agreement that a good story can help a game along massively. That said, there's also nothing wrong with a game forsaking the pen in favor of gameplay, as evidenced by the recent resurgence of retro-styled shooters that have similar ways of doing things. But that's a whole different conversation, and I've already spent more time talking about Blood's lack of story than Blood spent telling it. The point is, if you're looking for an epic tale told in the same style as something like BioShock, you sure ain't gonna find it here, but the borderline non-existent story is more than made up for by just about everything else.
I live again.
Blood begins by kicking the door right off its hinges and never, ever lets up. The game starts with you crawling out of your own grave. Zombies are popping up out of the ground and charging you down with rusty axes. There's this reference to the crow and a secret. You're stabbing motherfuckers to death with a goddamn pitchfork. This guy blows himself up. Dudes are getting set on fire and exploded. No time is being wasted. No corners are being cut. From the first level alone, you know exactly what you're getting yourself into, and oh, it is glorious. I'm almost not even sure where to start here because this game is just so damn good that it's kind of hard to convey just how well put together everything is. And tragically, just telling you to go play it for yourself wouldn't make for a very good review. Anyway, I guess the best place to begin would be with what you can already see. Some may think that the visual style of an action-forward game like this doesn't hold that much importance, but I beg to differ. I mean, sure, if a game has lackluster visuals but stellar gameplay, I'll probably still play it, but atmosphere matters a lot to me, and if I don't care about the world of a game, it's near impossible for it to stick with me in any kind of significant way. Luckily, the visuals of Blood aged remarkably well, owing in no small part to its art style. It's essentially a proven fact at this point that 9 times out of 10, games with a cohesive and consistent art style age way better than attempts at realism. The world of Blood is about as grim and gothic as you could ask for. I mean, you take one look at this haunted-ass library and tell me this game isn't dripping with atmosphere. Sure, there are a handful of levels that don't look all that great, but that's mostly due to technical limitations, you know? All things considered, the game is still some serious eye candy and has plenty of diverse and varied levels, which is pretty impressive actually. At first glance, you might expect everything to just be graveyards and cathedrals, and don't get me wrong, there's plenty of graveyards and cathedrals, but you end up traveling to all sorts of places like temples, a forest, a crashed boat, the Overlook Hotel from The Shining, or at least some vague approximation of it. Whatever the fuck this place is, whatever the fuck this place is! A carnival, a funhouse, a shopping mall, a sewer. Okay, maybe they're not all winners, but the very few bad levels are easily ignored thanks to the rest of the star-studded cast being some of the most memorable places you're likely to visit in a game from this era. Still, a level in a video game can look good all at once, but it has to play well too, and Blood is quite exceptional in that regard. It's nothing drastically different from the status quo at the time. You get dropped into a level and have to fight your way to the end. Your progress is blocked by enemies and locked doors you need to find the keys for, with health and munitions along the way to help your endeavors along. Pretty standard fare for the 90s, but the reason I call it exceptional is that the level designers for Blood understood that formula to an intimate degree. Nothing is slapdash. Enemies aren't just there for the sake of it. It all makes sense in the context of the game's world. Combat encounters flow beautifully too, and with the addition of jump boots, a power-up that predictably lets you jump higher and negate fall damage, there are a lot more opportunities for verticality than what you would get in something like Doom. There's the occasional puzzle too, and those are fine, I guess. With the exception of this one and Monster Bait that I have to Google the solution to every fucking time. Oh. Yeah, sure, I guess that works too. Mostly, though, the puzzles are used to access the secret levels, which are kind of unremarkable, honestly. The Funhouse one is pretty neat, but the others are just normal stages, basically, which is kind of disappointing, but whatever. Oh man, and speaking of secrets, they are everywhere in this game, and actually have a fair amount of detail sometimes, which I very much appreciate. That's another aspect of the level design I find noteworthy, is just how intricately detailed and interactive everything is. There's so much soul and character in all the signs and the various clutter. Little parts of the environment explode into pieces when shot, adding impact to chaotic firefights. Caleb comments sarcastically on the various things he sees.
Leftovers.
Huge chunks of the level explode to open up shortcuts or the way forward. It's impressively interactive for the time, and simply put, the world feels lived in. Or should I say, died in? I'm sorry. As we all know, though, the visual side of things is only half of what makes up an immersive experience, and oh, what's that? You want me to talk about the soundtrack? Oh, well, since you're asking, I guess I could, for your sake. I mean, I'm just a nice guy like that, you know? Shooter games in the 90s, and honestly even now, are frequently characterized by heavy, adrenaline-pumping soundtracks, usually drawing from metal and fast-paced electronic genres. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining about this, I love a soundtrack that gets me pumped to chainsaw a demon in half, but I gotta admit, after playing so many shooters, both retro and modern, I've started to get kinda desensitized to the exact same style of music being used in the vast majority of these titles. Look, I don't care how gnarly your riffage is, I've heard it all before at this point, and it just starts to blend into the background in a hazy blur to the point where I barely even notice it's there after a couple hours. All that being said, it's always a refreshing change of pace to play a game that tries something different with its soundtrack. And you may be able to guess by now that Blood is one of those games. So what we've got here is actually quite the opposite of your typical FPS OST. The music in Blood is made up of mostly slow, gothic ambient tracks. It definitely makes the most of its limitations. You almost forget you're listening to MIDI sometimes, and I gotta say, it really adds a lot to the atmosphere. Imagine exploring an area like this with a different soundtrack. Not quite the same, is it? No, the music here turns Blood into a much more creepy and foreboding experience, which is kind of ironic considering how frantic Blood's moment-to-moment gameplay tends to be, but it all manages to click together flawlessly. I can't even really explain it, man, it just works. Get out of here, badly cropped PNG of Todd Howard! Get out! Oh yeah, by the way, thanks for updating Skyrim and breaking everyone's mod list for the 100th time. I didn't even play Starfield because you're never going to top mod Skyrim. You can't even let us have that, can you? Gotta update that Creation Club interface, right? Nothing's more important than the fucking Creation Club interface! Whoa, got a little sidetracked there. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, Blood! Alright, look, I could talk about all the little things that make this game good for hours, but we've got to get to the meat and potatoes eventually here, and as I'm sure you can already tell from the background footage you've been seeing this whole time, I'm of course talking about Blood's absolutely thrilling gameplay. I just wanted to mention a few other things first, because while the gameplay is undoubtedly the best part, there are other aspects of the game that stand on their own merits as well, and I don't think it would have been fair to freak out about the shotgun for 25 minutes and then go like, oh yeah, the game looks pretty good too, I guess. So with that, it's time to freak out about the shotgun for 25 minutes. Blood legitimately has some of the best combat ever put into a first-person shooter. I know that may sound like hyperbole, but I cannot possibly overstate how tight and responsive it feels to play this game. Admittedly though, this part may be slightly more difficult to explain since if you've never played Blood, you can't fully understand how good it feels to lock into the mindset it puts you in of pure bloodlust. I mean, it turns you bloodthirsty, man. Game's a real bloodbath. If I think of any more blood puns, I'll let you know. I'm trying to work Bloodsucker into the script somewhere, it's just not happening. So, as was the style of the 90s shooter, the combat is fast. Like, turn a corner into gunfire and die in seconds fast. And the enemy placement allows for plenty of those types of corners, so a certain level of caution is usually advisable, at least on the higher difficulties. But what makes this game so fun? Well, I think it's a combination of the enemies and weapons all working so well together, the movement being snappy and responsive, and the fact that, let's face it, it just feels so damn satisfying to yeah! In other words, the combat feedback is stellar. For the enemies, there's actually a pretty good amount of them, and they mostly fill their roles quite well. The first ones you run into are zombies, which are pretty straightforward melee fodder. They come in big packs and rush you with axes, and that's basically it. Still, one of the great pleasures in this game is nuking a huge crowd of them with explosives, so that alone makes them a lot more fun to fight. Then add to that, the fact that you can blast their heads off and kick them around. There's even a carnival game about doing that. All that to say, the zombies serve their purpose as hordes of trash mobs. Somebody's gotta do it right. Then there's the cultists. Two varieties. The ones in brown robes have shotguns, and if they have gray robes, they're packing a Tommy gun and are way more dangerous. Plus, they must be handing out baggies of crushed up Adderall as a recruitment bonus at the Cabal headquarters because these fuckers are fast. Despite being some of the more commonly seen enemies in the roster, you should not underestimate them unless you're in the market for a cheap and easy Swiss cheese cosplay. Oh yeah, also, the brown-robed ones chuck TNT bundles at you on certain difficulties, which makes fighting them even more chaotic. I adore these bastards though, not just because they pose a good challenge, but also because they're hilarious. Watching these guys run around yelling their made-up cult language never fails to bring a smile to my face. Their goofy death scream is also the stuff of legend, which is good because these guys die in brutal fashion. Look at the death animation when they get set on fire. Holy shit! Rats, bone eels, spiders, gilbeasts, and hellhounds are also here, but there isn't a whole lot to say about any of them. Meanwhile, there's a lot to say about the gargoyles, or at least there would be if they would just get down here and fight me already! Yeah, flying enemies in blood are kinda jank. For some reason, they tend to forget the player exists and fly around in circles above you instead of actually doing anything. Anyway, when the gargoyles aren't playing the world's saddest game of Ring Around the Rosie, they throw bones at you? I think? I don't know, it barely does any damage at all. Sometimes I feel like they're just here to be a nuisance, but as per usual, blowing them up is always a nice dopamine hit. The hands are notable for being the most blatant Evil Dead reference in a game brimming with Evil Dead references. They're also notable for being tremendously annoying. I fucking hate these things. They sprint at you, or whatever the finger equivalent of sprinting is, and latch onto your throat to choke you to death. You can spam the use key to get them off, but here's a fun thing. Back when I used to play in DOSBox, that didn't freaking work because of some weird processing bug. So if I got grabbed by one of these things, I was essentially already dead. Fun! There's the bloated butchers, which shuffle around slowly, missing shots, throwing up, and generally sucking ass at everything. If you just crouch and keep a few feet of distance, they physically can't even hit you. The projectiles just fly right on over your head, sailing off into the distance, never to be heard from again. They work okay as meat shields for the rest of the enemies, I guess, what with how much health they have, but they're also really weak to fire, so just slapping a couple flares on them takes care of the problem. The Phantasms can go take a flying leap into an endless sea of despair and nothingness, where they can float around in circles eternally, throwing their stupid, shitty little skulls and screaming obnoxiously into the void. Also, I profoundly hate this trap in the sick ward, where you have to deal with like 4 of them at once, and there's all the machinery and the skull projectiles. It's so loud, dear God, help me! So essentially, the enemies are, for the most part, solid. I mean, even the annoying ones aren't as bad as I make them out to be, really, but thankfully, you've also got the luxury of wielding an absolutely apocalyptic amount of firepower. All of Blood's weapons are great. Like, all of them. And they all come equipped with some pretty ludicrous secondary fire abilities, too. For example, the flare gun seems straightforward until you right-click and... it shoots 8 flares out, which explode on impact, giving you an early game pseudo-rocket launcher. You know, until you get the actual rocket launcher, or napalm launcher as it's called here, which is hilariously powerful, and I don't even know how to explain this alt fire. You've got a Tommy gun, a Tesla cannon, which is more or less a combination of the plasma gun and BFG from Doom, a spray can flamethrower that you can also turn into a firebomb. Hell, even the pitchfork is useful for killing zombies, and those aren't even the interesting weapons. The shotgun is actually perfect. Look at how fast it reloads. Look at the firepower, the destruction. This is one of the best shotguns of all time. It just is. The dynamite is also rad because it takes a fair amount of practice to get good with it. It has an arc, and the longer you keep the fire button held down, the farther you throw it. The projectile explodes on contact, but if you use the alt fire, it bounces. It's all so dynamic and fun to play with. And if that's not enough, you can also get remote bombs and proximity mines. Then there's the Voodoo Doll, another personal favorite of mine, because if an enemy is off in the distance being annoying or flying around, you can just kind of do this and yeah. And that's everything. I think. Wait. Spray can, Tesla cannon, Voodoo. Oh yeah, the life leech exists! So all the weapons are, at the very least, good, and they sound beastly. The sound design in general is quite nice. The wind howling, the water flowing, the demonic chanting. Even the little, when you flick the lighter, it's all great stuff. But more to the point, it makes the weapons feel as powerful as they ought to. It's interesting, because Blood has such a bizarre and unique enemy roster and arsenal, you wouldn't imagine it would all feel so natural. It's an abstract puzzle, but the pieces all fit together so well, you'd almost think this was standard. And more importantly, I really can't stress this enough, it just feels good to play. There's so much little stuff too, like the fact that monster hitboxes are big enough that you can actually jump on top of them. It means you can more or less never get surrounded, and it allows for dynamic encounters. Like, check this out. This cultist is up here being annoying, but I can't quite reach him, so I use this gargoyle as a step stool and... that is just so cool. It's a rare treat, even now, to find a shooter where every aspect of its gameplay is cohesive and feels like it belongs. Well, almost every aspect. Too bad the story sucks! Yeah, if you think I've been holding out crucial details all this time, well, I hate to break it to you, but there ain't much to speak of. I mentioned earlier that there's barely any narrative, and I wasn't kidding. At the end of the first chapter, Caleb finds Ophelia's body strung up on this slab.
Ophelia. Show yourself! Show yourself!
Great delivery on that one by Stephen Waite, by the way. But the emotion of this scene is diminished slightly by the fact that this is the only other time we've seen Ophelia. Anyway, he kills a giant stone gargoyle, then he goes and kills a giant spider and finds Gabriel's body. Then he kills a giant two-headed hellhound, but doesn't find Ishmael's body. I guess he got eaten or something.
Or incinerated in the intro cutscene, but honestly, what are the chances of that?
Then he shows up at Chernobog's front door, and shocker of shockers, kills him. And that is it. That's the entire story. There's literally nothing else to talk about. Look, I shouldn't make fun. I know that was never the point of this game, but I guess it's just kind of weird to me, because, like, Doom, Duke 3D, Shadow Warrior, Quake, none of them even attempted to tell a story beyond rudimentary flavor text or manual entries. Meanwhile, Blood sort of sets itself up with characters and a general plotline, but essentially does nothing with any of it. I'm torn between thinking it deserves credit for trying and thinking it doesn't deserve any credit because it doesn't try at all. Whatever, it's fine. Caleb is one of my favorite video game protagonists of all time from the voice lines alone, so I'll forgive it. And again, like I said earlier, it's easy to forget the negative aspects when the positive ones shine so brightly. And man, I didn't even talk about the expansions yet, or the extra enemies that one of the expansions adds, or the power-ups, or the differences between the skill levels, or the 800,000 other references to pop culture and classic horror, or the user-created map sets. Dear Lord, some of those are good. Everyone talks about Death Wish, and rightfully so. It is one of the best map sets ever made for any game, but you should also play Fleshed Out. It may not be quite as good as Death Wish, but it comes damn close sometimes. I'm getting off track again. Point is, I could talk about this game for hours, but some of this stuff would end up being redundant to mention, so I'm leaving it here. If you're interested in shooters, you owe it to yourself to play Blood. You can pick it up for $10 on Steam under the name Blood Fresh Supply, which is an officially released source port and is kind of janky, but it works fine if you just want to play the game and not mess around with downloading community ports. They recently updated it to add the original DOS version too, which is pretty neat. Bottom line, Blood is cool and more people should play it. That's all I'm really trying to convey here.